so much for joining us tonight. We are the Dragonhood. So, welcome to Awaken Your Inner Dragon, meet the Dragonhood team. We are so excited to celebrate Leap Day with this fun event, leaping into perhaps a new career path for you. And we are going to have a great conversation with our two featured speakers tonight. Clair Poletti, our founder, Chief Empowerment Officer, and Dr. Jennifer Benjamin, our Chief Organizational Psychologist. Before we get into who they are and start talking about what the Dragonhood is, though, I'd like to direct you to some ways that you can interact with us right now. If you're joining us live, you can use the chat function to interact with us this evening. You can direct it to everyone or just to hosts and panelists. It's up to you. We also have a Q&A function. So as you're thinking of questions throughout the evening, please just go ahead and pop those in there. I will see them and I will be able to relay those questions in our Q&A portion towards the end. If you're watching the recording, feel free to email us at info@dragonhood.world or check out our website. You can connect with us on all forms of social media, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you might have at that point. So I am Rachel Inavenant. My pronouns are she, her. I am the head of fire breathing for the Dragonhood, and that is our fun way of saying head of social media and content strategy. We like to have fun where we work. And I am so excited to welcome our two speakers this evening. We are so grateful that you two could both join us. Starting off, of course, with Dr. Jennifer Benjamin. Dr. Benjamin is the Chief Organizational Psychologist for the Dragonhood. Her pronouns are she, her. Dr. Benjamin completed her doctoral degree in industrial and organizational psychology at Capella University, her master's degree in counseling psychology at Immaculata University, and is a licensed professional counselor. She has multiple areas of training and clinical expertise and specialty certificates. In addition to being the Dragonhood's chief organizational psychologist and managing her private practice, she works as the clinical fidelity specialist and faculty at the Philadelphia Child and Family Therapy Training Center. Dr. Benjamin was previously an adjunct professor for Rosemont College in the undergraduate psychology program and graduate mental health counseling program. She also has 10 years of history as an experiential corporate trainer, coach, and game designer for action-centered training. Thank you for joining us tonight, Jen.
It's so good to be here.
We're so
I'm so
excited.
excited.
And of course, our other featured speaker is none other than Clair Poletti, the founder and chief empowerment officer of Dragonhood. Claire's pronouns are she, her. Claire has more than 20 years of experience leading teams in global and national corporations, as well as facilitating corporate team building for Fortune 100 companies. The Dragonhood brings Claire's unique approach to leadership empowerment coaching and team building to the world. She understands the challenges and opportunities leaders and teams face in a corporate setting. A passionate storyteller, presenter, and experienced branding and messaging professional, she loves sharing what she has learned about building positive culture and empowering teams and future leaders with others. Hi, Claire.
Hello, everybody. I cannot stop smiling. I am so thrilled that we're here together on Leap Day, this magic day in this amazing year of the Dragonhood. I am over the moon.
We are so excited that we are finally officially launching the Dragonhood. This is an epic day. So now that we have you here, Claire, can you tell us what is the Dragonhood? What is your founder story? How did we get here?
Absolutely, Rachel. And I think it's something that it resonates with a lot of people. I'm happy to share a little bit about what inspired all this. And it really was my experience of in earlier stages in my career, this feeling of limited avenues for success, right? Limited space that I could take up or that I saw. And it was really exhausting to sort of fill this space that I believed was afforded to me. And, in the course of that, various different aspects of jobs or whatever, over time, as I began to allow myself to take up or be authentic and take up as much space as I felt any situation warranted, and we're going to talk about what that means, is when my career really started to take off. My leadership skills increased, my opportunities increased. The things that made me unique that I was holding back or holding myself small were the things that really helped me accelerate. So when I think about the Dragonhood, my experience was shifting from this powerful imagery is so important too. So the idea that we all have this amazing, beautiful, magical being, this dragon living inside of us that we constantly hold in, and the opportunity to unfurl that, be the best version of yourself, meaning the most authentic version of yourself, not the version of yourself that society is sort of reflecting is acceptable to you. That becomes really powerful. So that's sort of an abbreviated sort of story of the Dragonhood. We have a lot of other opportunities in future to share a lot more detail on sort of what inspired that. But it really, the dragon imagery is so great because it feels like magic. That is what it feels like to me when you start to be moving through the world this way. It's so empowering.
I love the way you describe that, Claire. It is empowering. And now, so Jen, could you tell us a little bit about how does psychology play into this?
Sure. So when Claire would share with me, I awakening my inner dragon and narrating this, I'm like, oh, you're thinking systemically. You're being aware of your system you're embedded in and your position of power and privilege, blah, 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 right? And really, what Claire was talking about is learning how to self-study and discover those moments that we are usually bound by our historical rules, beliefs, and rituals formed from our lived experiences.
Mhm.
And what she was able to do was to identify that moment and then decide that she had a choice to create um, opportunity for herself, right? So that self awareness, instead of it being uncomfortable, it became this opportunity to utilize her strengths, utilize her perspectives as resources as she was intersecting with people across environments, right? So from more of that clinical or psychological theory perspective, it was like, oh yes, makes total sense. We should do something with this.
That's some pretty powerful stuff. So now that we're hearing this and that we can sort of upend these systems and we can awaken our inner dragon, Claire, can you start by telling us sort of how can we do this? What are there sort of step-by-step way that we can do it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love having Dr. Benjamin on because I spend a lot of time talking about dragons and magic, and she lends the credence and the psychology to the conversation, which is so lovely. We're so fortunate to have her. And yeah, the Dragonhood approach is really tied to our mantra. And that mantra is be authentic, be curious, be accepting, take up space, and awaken your inner dragon. And we're going to go through that. Jen and I are going to go through that step by step, just for a few minutes here to talk about that. And when we say awaken your inner dragon, we are really talking about how you can reframe your perspective. How can we find a new way of looking at, like I said earlier, the space that's afforded to us, right? Our perception of what we should be in any given setting. How can we look at that differently? How can we look at a challenge differently so it becomes solvable? So we have the ability to see opportunities around us. So starting with the first Dragonhood value, be authentic, right? We hear a lot about this, I think, in this day and age. And the sort of hearing it and living that way are two very different things. And it's a pathway. And there's a lot of steps within each one of these things. But being authentic is, again, I mentioned this earlier, it's really about what are your innate superpowers? What are your core beliefs? What is your genius? What was it that you are meant to do and be? And how can you be that version of yourself? How can you notice the opportunity to be that version of yourself all the time? And that is something that takes a little bit of practice, which we'll talk about as well. But that's authenticity is a really critical part of that. Jen, do you have anything you want to add for that one?
Yeah, what I think happens for people is that we lose sight of that we all have strengths and abilities. Whatever we've walked through in life, even if there was adversity, it has allowed us to have a resiliency or an increased ability to do something. And so we get stuck in this place of, as you always say, trying to stay small. And what we're forgetting about is that if we were authentically us, that our strengths and our resources that we already possess, we can access and use them whenever we want, right? Those are our superpowers. Like who we are is already there. It's so often people are like, oh, I have to change, I have to this, I have that. It's like, well, why don't we just use what you have?
That's such a great ad. And I really like how you said too about like part of that authenticity is all those lived experiences that you moved through, right? Like that is really what frames a lot of our perspective. And that's why when you're in these rooms or have these opportunities, we're talking a lot about a corporate setting or a work setting, whatever that might be. But that's really what, you have such a unique perspective, and sharing it only improves what's going on around you. So the next value, I'll just keep going here, is to be curious. And curiosity is it's a superpower in and of itself. And I think if you took nothing else away from this, like being able to approach things with real curiosity makes a huge difference in all of your interactions. So be curious about people, ideas, everything. Be curious as opposed to defensive or, another way of being. So when somebody comes at you with a request at work, instead of being like, well, why the HE whatever are they asking me for this, right? When you feel attacked, right, that often happens, right? So the opportunity to sort of be curious about what their experience is and say, well, why would they be asking me for this? What need might we need to meet for them? How can I do that, right? And that curiosity is really a great equalizer. It allows you to spend less time, maybe being mad or feeling like you should, like, why is somebody asking me this question, right? So I think it's a really important step. And this isn't about day-to-day interactions. Like we all know when those emails come across and you're like, really? That's a moment to be curious. Jen, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, this I often think about what gets in the way of us being curious. And two things always come up for me. One, when we're feeling insecure, especially when we're in a performative environment like work, right? We base our perfect on our insecurity. And you can imagine how big it gets. Some of us already know, right? And so I just think that it's going to be important in terms of developing curiosity that we're really talking about how do we use other people around us, lean into others. And one of those ways is curiosity, which is really, we're talking about cultural humility, this belief that everybody has something to offer. And just because we're not understanding it initially doesn't mean that it's not valuable and useful for everybody's success, for our own success. So I really think that when we're looking at managing defensiveness, it's going to be that ability to slow down and put ourselves in other people's shoes, which is part of being curious.
Yeah, I think it's a really common experience. I was actually on a call in another setting, and having a conversation with a large group of people. I had rushed to jump on the call from a doctor's appointment, so I was a little bit flustered, and something came up on the call that was truly shocking to me about an initiative, and it really took me, like, I was like, oh, like what's going on? I had no idea. Like it was a big piece of new information that I didn't have, right? So I sort of went into coming out of that shock. I started to really defend what I had done to that point, right? Like almost reflexively, not almost, absolutely reflexively, like, oh, well, we did this, and we did this, and we did this, and we did it. The amazing thing, and we're always still learning, right? Nobody's perfect at this, is that I was able to work through, like once I got through the shock, and it manifests differently, right? Like normally you would say, oh, I'm angry or I'm upset that somebody said this, but I was like stunned, right? Like what? And had to work through the shock to come back to curiosity. And, when Jen says everyone has something meaningful to contribute, if you can get past how it's presented and maybe not ascribe intent, which I certainly felt in that moment of shock, right? Somebody was implying clearly that this didn't go right, and it's my thing, so it must be my fault, right? I had that whole story. So if you can take that curiosity, it de-escalates everything. And we were able to get to a really critical piece of input that was absolutely imperative to the project we were working on. So I share that by way of an example. That was like a week and a half ago, right? So like this takes practice and is something we need to do a lot of. So be curious. The next one, be accepting. So this is really about not judging yourself or those around you. It sounds similar to curiosity, but it really is about allowing that to happen, right? I was in shock. I, didn't necessarily manage through a conversation perfectly. And I had to accept that happened. I know a lot of us can drive ourselves through perfectionism or feeling of needing to make sure we do everything exactly right. But it really was important to be accepting, to not judge myself, to not judge the person coming across, right? So accepting what was happening, assuming good intentions, right? Not creating a narrative in my head about why this person was bringing something to me, not creating stories of meaning, and really accepting, again, good intentions and accepting at face value what's coming at you. And that really creates a lot of psychological safety for yourself, and you can control that instead of needing it to come from other people. Jen, what are your thoughts?
I think about that. The reason people struggle to accept is because we're protecting our ego, and our ego gets hurt by shame, right? And shame is really an emotion that's polarized to being able to accept something. And we just get this notion that feeling things is bad, and emotions are not bad. They're our GPS, literally. They're what run our mind and our body. And so when we are protecting ourselves instead of accepting, what we want to do is be gracious and kind, and just be thankful that there's some part of us that's trying to take care of ourselves, and not make facts out of the emotion in that moment, right? When we can start to be kind and gracious, then we can replicate that with others by developing acceptance and observing and describing what is being said. Because a lot of times our dysregulation ignites that lack of psychological safety feeling that happens in the moment.
Yeah, total threat response, right? Like my heart was racing. I'm feeling attacked because someone's raising this thing. Like, absolutely, I'm sure a lot of people have um, this sort of approach, right? Or have had that experience. And it's interesting because the next one is take up space. And the reason it's interesting is because when we think about interacting with a threat, are very organic in nature is to shrink or retreat from the danger, right? So this is a moment where you would, and this is how I phrase it, because this is what it feels like to me, is like shrink yourself, pull everything back in, don't rock the boat, don't be too disruptive. I explain it sometimes as like, don't shine too brightly or take up too much space in the room or the virtual room, right? So when you sort of, it's like you burn your hand and you pull it back, right? So in this moment, taking up space is the lean in, right? So if something is happening, you're experiencing this sort of sequence that we're talking about, you have to notice that is really in the moment where you need to contribute more. And if you can do so in a way, again, that is assuming good intent, you're not judging yourself or the other people in the room, there's something in you that you need to share. That is really the moment to lean in, right? If you didn't care, you wouldn't be experiencing that series of emotions. So it really is important to take up space.
So what I appreciate about this concept is, to me, what you're promoting is you need to treat yourself as valuable and useful. And when you do that, you actually create opportunity for other people to be experienced as valuable and useful. And it's very counterintuitive, right, to what you think you may want to do, to make space for other people you think get small. And that's actually not how it works. When we use ourselves in a way that's valuable and useful, it promotes that other people can follow and do the same thing, right? We're creating a culture where we are saying your experiences and your input are meaningful, and what we're really creating is an alliance. We're disrupting isolation, and we're creating opportunity for allyship, and to create opportunity for more voices to be at the table than usually show up.
It's so true, Jen. And like when you take up space, you create space for others to do the same. It is that psychological
Mhm.
safety that becomes so critical and so
Mhm.
important.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I'd like to just take a second too to ask the audience, have you ever experienced this sort of situation where instead of taking up space, you made yourself small, or if you withdrew after feeling like you were shining too brightly, like Claire mentioned, um, or if you felt like you made some suggestions and they weren't received very well, so that you just took a step back. If anyone wants to share some of their experiences, feel free to do so in the chat. Again, if you're watching live, you can do that to just hosts and panelists, or to everyone. If you're watching the recording, you can put it in the comments of this video. I'd love to see some of those rolling in. Yes, we had some people saying, yes, we've definitely been in those situations. I do feel like a lot of it's kind of universal, right? And so many of us have experienced that. While we're getting the conversation going in the chat and in the comments section, Claire and Jen, could you talk a little bit about what comes after the Dragonhood values? Like what comes from following this path?
Right. So follow these 4 simple steps to awakening your inner dragon, right? And there's a lot more into it, but what happens when you start to follow these things is you begin to allow success and positive opportunities to unfold. And this is what I was describing earlier. When I started to move through the world differently, when I started to allow myself to be the unvarnished version of myself, right? Not rude, not disrespectful, but like real, my real thoughts in real time. It really enabled success in my career in a way that I had not experienced to date, right? I think about that description of the glass ceiling, and like I could almost see it was like a Clair shaped glass box that I couldn't quite get past, right? So when you are moving through the world this way, you start to notice patterns. And that sort of cycle we just talked about is a pattern. So when you notice it, when you notice whether it's like that moment of withdrawal, or you notice that you're, gosh, I'm like kind of judging, or, putting a story behind this, we start to notice those moments. That's when you can start to see opportunity within the challenge. That is the reframe. That is the moment of being the dragon, right? That inner dragon coming forward. And it can look different when you're noticing, right? So the first thing you might start doing as you're moving through this is literally noticing those moments. You may respond by doing something different or not doing something, right? That's a different behavior too. And it all takes practice, right? You may need to role play scenarios with a friend. I, have been a manager for years, and more than one occasion have said, like, let's practice, let's talk it through, right? Let's say these words. What if the person reacts strongly? What if somebody cries? Like, practicing that stuff. And practicing creates preparedness, right? Like this is how you get used to it, and you can have positive repeated moments of success, right? The patterns become repeat moments of success instead of repeat challenges.
Well, what I hear you talking about is really, what are you going to do with these patterns of uncomfortableness? You can they're very accessible. We have go-to fallback ways that we deal with patterns of being uncomfortable. But if we simplify it, what we're talking about is, how do we habitually or out of habit relate to people? And Claire is really punctuating, you can't work on what you don't see. I mean, you just can't, right? Like, we can't change what we don't see.
Right.
But ultimately, if we can see it, if we can understand what the uncomfortableness is about, that's when we can respond by learning and building the ability to be comfortable with the uncomfortableness.
AKA tapping into your inner dragon, spreading those wings and flying. It's so great, right? And that imagery, I talked about it earlier, but like, it literally feels like releasing, your gorgeous wings, your shiny, beautiful self, and just sort of literally moving through the world in a way that is so different. And when you think about the emotional energy of keeping yourself in a space that you think you should be, or behaving in a way you should be, or moving through careers and life in a way that you should be, it's exhausting. So there is this amazing transformation and brightness that like a lightness that it feels when you're able to release a lot of that and not spend all this time holding yourself in. And again, that dragon, like, imagine the emotional energy of hiding a giant magic dragon like inside you or behind you, right? Like, oh, hey, no, I'm just here being normal. Like, nobody needs to worry about the dragon. Like, so instead of doing that and investing that energy, you get to then really shine and spend all that energy solving problems or finding opportunity or creating this beautiful space for others to operate in. And that is something, and I know this is really important to Dr. Benjamin, and she will comment on this. You must celebrate the successes, right?
Mhm.
Celebrate the noticing, celebrate, it's not perfect, but celebrate the noticing, celebrate you're behaving differently, celebrate yourself being a little bit uncomfortable and taking risks in ways that you would normally have withdrawn. And I know Dr. Benjamin cannot wait to speak about celebrating your success.
I was so glad that Claire made this a part of the journey, because what we are allowed to celebrate is informed by our lived experiences. And I don't know about you, but I haven't met a lot of people who actually enjoy getting public compliments. It evokes a lot of stuff in people. And so learning how to take that 45 seconds and just totally soak in and enjoy that earned success or that compliment is part of learning how to let your dragon fly and be there. Because what you're also learning how to do is self-validate that what my strengths are and what my resources are enough and are valuable and have a place here where I'm at. And so when we think about it that way, it makes sense that it's so unusual to celebrate the self, and that is part of the dragon process.
It's really true. And I have to say, like, I noticed that when I was so proud of myself for navigating that situation I described, where I was really shocked, I was really put on my heels, and I was talking about it with a friend, and I said, I was so proud of myself when I came back to my curiosity. And that even feels weird to say. So even being complimentary or kind to yourself when you're assessing the success, that you notice something, and even if it wasn't perfect, you still navigated it in a different way. And I do think it comes back to that, like, brightness, right? Sometimes when we're paid compliments, it's the same thing as a bright light being shined on us. And you're like, no, no, it was a team effort. And no, it's great. Like, and that is all true, but really take it in for a second, like, appreciate that moment, appreciate that input. And I see it all the time, right? When you want to stump somebody in your circle, ask them what went well today because you were there, right? Like, oh, there's a million things that went well just because you are you and you showed up to do your job, right? So take that. It's another one, like be curious and also take those compliments, feel them and experience them.
I think the really important piece about what you're narrating is that when we learn how to celebrate, an alliance follows. And then we start being surrounded by people who take delight in our success. And it's okay for us to be successful, which changes the narrative.
Yeah. It's not just okay. It's like effing amazing and everybody around you wins. I've lived this myself. Like it's so great.
So now that we're hearing about celebrating successes and how exciting this all is, I am sure that our viewers are getting very curious about how they can participate in this. So, Claire, what makes a good candidate for this coaching, whether it's individual or if it's in a group situation? Who should do this?
It's a deceptively simple criteria, like what makes somebody ready to dragon. I think you really have to have an interest in it. You want something different, a desire to see a different outcome, to move through life a little bit differently. You have to be willing to experience discomfort a little bit, right? This is a skill like anything else, a willingness to practice. It's you hear that expression all the time. I think it was like Malcolm Gladwell, like the 10,000 hours to be an expert. That's something we hear a lot of, right? So you do have to spend some time in it, right? Like I've been living this methodology for, I don't know, 18 months. Like it's been longer, right? Like, but when I've been trying to put it on paper, I've been living this experience for quite some time. And it really is about like a willingness to just see the world differently and try to disrupt sort of your typical approach to things, right?
Yeah, I think it's really about being vulnerable enough to just grab a hold of your intuition. Because to me, awakening your inner dragon is that as your intuition shows up, you are now grabbing a hold of it. Because the reason people don't act on their intuition is that intuition lasts for a couple moments. And if you don't grab a hold of it, it just disappears. And so you don't have to see the path or know how to get there. You just have to decide that your intuition is exactly what it needs to be, and that you're willing to ride this wave of vulnerability. And although it's going to, basically what Claire's saying is that when the waves, out in the ocean and it's 10 feet and it's super scary, right? But then think about an ocean. By the time the wave kisses the shoreline, it's this big. It's this, it's not actually as scary as you thought when you ride it all the way out.
Yeah. And I just have to build on that because it's a growth mindset, right? Like that moment of you hear a lot of people refer to like the growing edge, right? Like that is vulnerability is your growing edge. That is an opportunity. That is a place of growth, and growth is uncomfortable. Like when you are changing, it can be uncomfortable. And I think that's something that you have to be willing to sort of spend a little bit of time in, being brave enough to try, being willing to notice things and stay in it and feel it, lean in, right? Don't shrink yourself, stay big, using your tools. And, Jen, I think you talked about this earlier too. It's not about protecting yourself. It's
No, being
allowing yourself to be
prepared.
authentic. And that can be so scary.
Well, it's preparing. Growth. It happens in a moment. It's all the preparedness for that moment. And when it happens, your intuition shows up, you grab a hold of it, and it's really creating this story where it's okay for you to do it. And then you repeat that new way of relating to yourself and others, and then it just becomes the way that you do things.
AKA being a dragon. I want to take a minute here. Jen and I have been talking a lot, and honestly, I could talk about dragons all day. But I'd like to take a minute and ask Rachel. Rachel is an early dragon protege and an early adopter of this sort of experience. And I really want to ask you, Rachel, to share with our audience, like you have awakened your inner dragon. You went through an experience, and I want to ask, like, how did you know when you had awakened your inner dragon?
So for me, and I know my journey won't be the same as a lot of other people, but for me, the day I recognized that I had fully awakened that dragon was the day that I quit my job. Which might, at first blush seem a little counterintuitive, but it wasn't. I was uh, in a career that I was very passionate about, but it was a position that was no longer good for me. It was no longer a good fit. I was feeling myself becoming small and tiny and cramped. And those manifested themselves in aspects like burnout and anxiety and things like that too. So um, it did take me a while to awaken that dragon. It took having people around me who cared about me, including Claire, of course, to sort of help me finally realize I needed to hold up a mirror to the situation and see what it was doing to me. And so it took quite a bit of work and quite a bit of coaching. Claire can nod her head for this. Um, but I felt that moment, and this powerful moment when I made that decision to quit and I actually did it, and I followed through and I committed. That was the most freeing feeling. I know we've talked a lot about that imagery tonight, the soaring, the wings, all of it, but it's so true. And when you can open yourself up to the fact that there are other opportunities out there for you and you're not stuck in a box that you thought you were stuck in. That's something that's very exciting. And yeah, it just makes you feel like you're so open to new things.
That's so great, Rachel. And I want to just, like, for the good of the group, not everybody has to go quit their job because you feel stuck or whatever. Like, Rachel's experience is really specific to what she was dealing with. And I think that if you can hear in her voice, right, like, even as she was talking about when she was at the job, it was a little smaller than like when she was talking about after, right? There's a before and after for sure. And the opportunity to sort of, through all of this, is choose yourself and
Mhm.
choose opportunity out of the challenge, right? So dare to choose a different thing, right? And Rachel, I'd love to ask you just another follow-up, right? Like, the shoulds, right? The societal, like, you should like this job, this should be great for you. You'd worked really hard for this job. So just interested to hear a little bit more about that aspect of it.
Yeah, and those shoulds are what made me stay in that situation for a lot longer than I think I would have
Mhm.
otherwise. But yes, it should have been the perfect job. It should have been my dream job. Um, and eventually you hear those shoulds so much and you start to believe them. And I think it can make you feel like you can just keep hanging on and it'll get better. You make all these excuses. Um, and they start to weigh you down. And we've talked a little bit about the imagery now. Spoiler, you can hear more of this story if you listen to our podcast, but we'll get to that in a minute. But yes, just being handed more and more things that I just couldn't possibly carry anymore, and recognizing that all those shoulds, who was defining those shoulds? you know
Well,
and
I was just, Rachel, I was just gonna say, right, you're talking about the shooting, right? And what that's really about, what you were describing, is that you were feeling this pressure of being emotionally responsible for others
Mhm.
around you and how they may or may not feel. And in fact, you were creating, as we all do, right? We create fact out of emotion instead of turning to our intuition. And I don't think you're probably surprised that the best choice was to quit your job. I think you probably knew the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I think is sort of the beauty and the simplicity of it. In the course of coaching, it's getting you to recognize your own intuition, getting you to recognize the things that you already did know deep down. but it's just covered in layers of nonsense in some ways. So yeah, no, that's a perfect way to put it. And yeah, once I finally recognized that, I changed. And I hope that it's manifests itself in other ways. Like I feel like besides being better at work and not always like replaying conversations in my head, like, oh, I could have answered that better. I don't do that as much, which is incredibly freeing. If you're one of those people, like how I used to be, was always replaying conversations. Um, and just, stating facts in team meetings and not feeling like I have to soften the message for someone whose feelings
Mm.
might get hurt. Why was I expending all of that energy on other people? Um, and I think, it ultimately it's made me a better, I think, a partner, a better friend, a better mom. It's showed itself up in other aspects of my life too. So I can't say enough about how important it is to awaken that dragon and stop feeling so constrained by all these external and internal pressures we put on ourselves.
Mhm.
Absolutely true, Rachel. And I just have to shout out that you got like a million applauses and celebrations from the audience when you were sharing your story, and a lot of great comments relating to that experience. Folks have felt that. We all have felt that, right? And I think just kudos to you for one sharing and just letting people experience sharing a little bit of your experience for everyone to feel.
Yes, my pleasure. Well, now I'm sure everyone is saying, what can I do? How can I sign up for this? Tell me more, Claire.
Yeah, so we wanted to just take a minute. We're going to save some time for Q&A. We are pleased to say spot on time here. So we're going to just share a little bit about some of the opportunities you have to work with us here at the Dragonhood. And then we'll get into Q&A. And I'm seeing a lot of really great comments in the chat, some questions that are coming through directly to the host. So Rachel is going to start taking a look at those. And what we have are a couple different things. So one is we're going to be continuing to offer webinars periodically. We also have a limited availability for one-on-one sessions. We can do it a couple different ways. Typically, it would be like a 6-week session once a week. So we have really limited availability for that. If you are interested, please reach out on our website, dragonhood.world. There's a contact us form. You can fill that out and let us know that's something you'd be interested in, and we can have a conversation and see if it's right for you. The other thing is that we also offer, we've mentioned this, corporate training or large groups. If this is something that you might want to do, if you're a manager of a team and want to do it all together, there's an opportunity for large groups, in addition to sort of other type of corporate events that might be possible. And this is really customized for each group depending on the needs that you have. And with enough lead-in time, she's very busy. Our brilliant Dr. Benjamin is available for those as well. And it's quite a powerful experience, as I can attest. Um, and we also have some really cool things that you may not expect. So we actually do rhythm entrainment, some really cool things that are experiential. You might think of it as like a drum circle, but it's actually a peer review health rhythms methodology that is a great experience, number one, for creating connectivity and attunement across broader groups. It's an amazing experience for practicing vulnerability. It's a little stressful, right? To sort of, oh, we're going to,
Mhm.
play egg shakers or play a drum or whatever it is, right? So there's really cool opportunity and incredible value. There's rhythm entrainment for regulation. There's rhythm entrainment to celebrate. There's rhythm entrainment to sort of create connectivity and listening and intuition between each other. So a lot of great opportunities there. And as Rachel teased, we are thrilled to officially announce the Here Be Dragons podcast. We have several episodes already recording. We are going to be launching in March, which is tomorrow. Now, the first episode's not posting tomorrow, but we'll let everybody know. But we are so excited to be sharing this with you and just being able to share more stories about what you heard, more detail and background from my founder's experience, more detail in Rachel's experience, and certainly hearing from Dr. Benjamin and other experts. And certainly that's a pathway that we want to bring more diverse voices forward as well. We think that is such an important thing to create a platform for, right? We are 3 cishet white women. That is our experience. And we want to make sure that we're creating a platform and a voice for all different experiences. And I think Rachel put the link in the chat for everybody to reach out to us through the contact us form and stay connected. We'll include, when we send everybody the recording notification, we'll include a little opportunity to sign up for updates. And I think we're going to go right into the Q&A now. We have 13 minutes, so let's use every last one of them.
Yes. Okay. So let's kick it off with our first question. What advice would you offer someone who maybe has been stuck in their current circumstance for a while?
Yeah,
Mm.
I think this is a good one. And I think the answer is not quit immediately, right? I just keep pointing back to that. I think it's really, and we think through the stages, right? Accept that feeling, be curious about it, and release the judgment, right? So judging yourself for it is not helpful, right? Judging yourself for being stuck. Should I have been doing this differently? Can I be better? Like, really just release the judgment and really be curious about what's triggering it. Why are you having that experience? And I think that the opportunity to then acknowledge, right? It's tiring, right? You're fatigued, it's tiring. That feeling of being stuck doesn't feel good. But how can you sort of breathe out, reassess? And when you think about the Dragonhood mantra, right? Be authentic, like be honest with yourself about what really you need, be curious, be accepting, and then take up space, right? Shrinking is not going to make your experience better. So how can you take up space and take back control? Or what are the opportunities to reframe what's happening around you? We don't all have the luxury of leaving our jobs, right, without another one lined up. That is a reality. So how can you reframe and have a different experience within what's happening around you?
I just want to add for that, I think it starts with as simple as, of course I'm stuck. How could I not feel stuck right now? You know, starting that process of changing how you're relating to yourself so you can change the way you relate to your environment and others and things around you is really part of what, Claire's describing.
Yes. So that's a great way to start getting unstuck. So another question we've got is, how can people learn to recognize their intuition?
Yeah,
Mm,
that's a good one.
yeah.
You're usually really uncomfortable. Like you're usually having a moment where you're like, I would literally, if I say this, you'll all know, right? You ever have that ick feeling? Like that you're like, it's not always bad, but it's easier to spot in those moments. Like when you're in a room and you're working on a project and like it's going sideways and like you just get this like ick and you have something in your mind, you're like, oh, they're not realizing or considering these things. And you're like, oh, should I say something? Should I not say something? Like that is a moment of intuition. And again, according to our Dragonhood mantra, that is the moment to take up space and share because your experience is so different. Everyone's unique. Everyone's experience is different. And those in that room have not considered it because they aren't you. And you add value to every space you're in. So noticing intuition, it's easier to start with the icky ones because then you start to see them and feel them. And I would ask anybody in the chat, like, have you guys ever felt that ick moment? Like for sure. And I'm not talking about a time where you're physically not safe. I want to be really clear, but like you just like, oh, you feel that tension in your gut, right? That's something to notice.
I also, just to think about intuition as a construct. So what is intuition made up of? So our intuition is really our wisdom. So wisdom is one part logic and one part emotion, right? So I could be at work and have rage and it's paired with logic. And my logic says, if you put the chair through the wall, you will definitely lose your job. Do not do it, right? I have this intuition that shows up and I know, I got to do that, right? The other thing to think about is where outside of work do you allow your intuition to be recognized and heard and held? And because we all have intuition, it shows up for us all the time. We just have to think about where we're allowing it to show up and So that way we can refamiliarize ourselves with what that is. And sometimes it's as small as driving. We all have intuition when we drive. It's just outside of our awareness. So it's starting to build this process of pulling things within your awareness.
All right, that's great. We've got another question that just came in. Can you talk a bit more about the 6-week program?
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's something that can feel a little intimidating to sort of focus on. Um, Gosh, we're going to talk about, my faults for 6 weeks, right? No, that is not it. So we're going to spend a lot of time um, uncovering what your core beliefs are. What are the things that matter most to you? What are your ideals that are not compromisable, and the things that make you the most you version of yourself, right? So that's a big piece of it, and that is something that we don't spend a lot of time in. And I think the interesting piece of it for me, in my experience in becoming a dragon, I value calmness, and I value a safe work environment. I value sort of everyone around me. And I think that's what it's interesting, because my authenticity led to the dragonhood. So I do think like you can hear those core values resonating here, but creating space for others, in creating space for myself, and lifting everyone up. So those are some of my values that I've uncovered over time. And that sounds so altruistic and like noble, but also like it's very true, right? The opportunity to say like I want to move through scary situations in a way that has calmness. I want to be thoughtful. And again, nobody's a Zen goddess over here. I almost, had to cancel one of our podcast episodes because I couldn't get my part to be right. You know what I mean? Like it happens, right? But I do think like that's an early piece of it. So grounding yourself in who you are and spending that time unapologetically thinking about it. We leverage a tool called Working Genius, which is so incredible. It helps you assess your skill sets and your innate geniuses in the context of work, in the context of stages of work and projects, if you think about it that way. So we lean into what those letters are. And that is really powerful way. In my experience, it gave me language
Mhm.
for who I am and how I organically, authentically behave. And when you start, that's another helpful way to start noticing, to start helping people understand, um, helping you realize when you're being authentic, right? And that push pull you start to feel sometimes. It's a really organic tool, and it's really, really great. And then we just work through real solutions. Like we might work through real problems, right? If you say, hey, I'm dealing with this issue, like how might we talk about this in the context of the dragonhood, right? How might we talk about this in terms of being authentic, being curious, being accepting, and taking up space? Jen's dying to add something. We got to let her in here.
Yeah. So I am obsessed with the Working Genius. It's so great because, at the beginning, I was talking about you can't work on what you don't see, right? And so this assessment takes all of this stuff that's already happening and it makes it tangible. So we can see where it's playing out and we understand the context that's happening when we're intersecting with other people, right? So Claire helped me break down, you're an evangelizing innovator. So if you're engaging with people who work this way, this is what you're going to experience. And I'm like, oh my God, that's exactly what's happening. And then we can prepare the response on what I can do differently when I'm relating, that I can take up space, I can keep my dragon out, and still accomplish what I need to accomplish. And it was just so great to have my experience described to me in such digestible constructs.
Yeah, and they're so applicable. And I have to give a
Mhm.
shout out to Donna McLean from Agents of Way, who introduced me to Working
Mhm.
Genius. It is such regular words to understand yourself. My Working Genius is one of them is galvanizing, which is creating community, getting everybody on board, like, and you realize like, oh, I'm that way all the time, not just at work or not just in this situation. So it really, really helps. And it helps identify like altitudes to be at in different stages of work, which is also super helpful, because sometimes like your genius isn't needed in some settings, right? And that's okay. So knowing when other people can take it and you can lean in. It's this beautiful sort of rhythm. So great question.
Yeah, and incredibly helpful for team building. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Very quickly, could you both tell us, looking around you, looking back, can you think of examples of dragons in your lives or in your journeys? What does that look like? And while they're answering, if anyone watching wants to say of a dragon that you know of in your life or in your past, drop that in the chat or in the comments watching the video. We'd love to hear about it.
Well, first of all, spoiler alert, every single person on this call is a dragon. And I also want to acknowledge that we really love dragons because they are gender neutral, right? Anybody can be a dragon. Doesn't matter. That's not what this is about. This is about your authentic experience. So literally all y'all are future dragons or dragons already, right? But one thing that's really cool, and you start seeing these dragons all around you, and it's really inspiring. I'm gonna say two. There's two dragons that I saw back to back very recently in South Carolina. So I will go very quickly. We had the opportunity to see Stevie Nicks, who's 75, one night. And then the second night we saw Itzhak Perlman, who's like a renowned violinist. He's 78, back to back. So two dragons, different genders, different lived experiences, total badasses. Just an amazing, like Stevie Nicks is 75, self-described. She talks about herself in a way that's so complimentary. It's awe-inspiring for me personally. Absolute Rock and Roll Hall of Fame double inductee. She calls herself a girl, the only girl who got in twice, right? Literally comes in and, walks on stage, grabs the mic and blows the roof off the place. And then Itzhak has a totally different experience. He has disabilities, right? He no longer walks, so he uses a mobility scooter. And you can imagine the dragon in that is, sort of classical music. It's very pretentious. It can be very pretentious, very stiff upper lip, right? This guy rolls out in his mobility scooter and just like turns his chair and picks up his violin and just again blows the roof off this place with his technical prowess and disrupts. He's his authentic self in that moment, right? There's no tuxedo, no tails, no, right? Like no pretension. It was just an amazing experience. So those are two examples of dragons that I saw very recently.
Love it. Fantastic examples. Jen, did you have one you wanted to share quickly?
Yeah, I just think about the founder of the clinical model that I practice, Dr. Marion Lindblad Goldberg. When she created the clinical model, ecosystemic structural family therapy, she was surrounded by men with their PhD, and there was a lot of what you should and should not do at that point in psychology because research really lacked an understanding of context and what culture means. And she just kept driving forward and saying, my humanness is telling me we have to look at children and families in their community and in context. And I'm not stopping until I accomplish that. And she spent decades establishing this clinical model that believes every family is their own best resource for change and that there's no challenge too big for them to solve, which is really hope instilling in people facing great challenges. So she's a dragon that I think about.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I know we could think of so many more examples. There's so many dragons throughout history too. But stay tuned. We'll be talking about more dragons in all of our other social feeds, of course. So be sure to follow us. I'm going to throw that slide into the chat for you. If you're watching the recording, of course, all that information is in the description. Thank you. Thank you to Dr. Benjamin. Thank you to Claire. Thank you so much for sharing your gifts and your talents with us this evening. We are so grateful to learn more about the Dragonhood. I hope that some of you listening are interested in signing up. Dragonhood.world is where you'll find all that information. Fill out that contact us form and look for more events, of course, too. You'll want to join us again. Hop into this conversation. We're building a community here, so we want to hear from you. Now, before we say goodnight, we always want to end with the Dragonhood mantra, so Claire is going to take that away.
Yeah, and I just want everyone to take in and appreciate this moment. You were so brave in joining us to talk about dragons for an hour. You were choosing something different. So take a deep breath and just in this moment, here's our mantra. Be authentic, be curious, be accepting, take up space, and awaken your inner dragon. Thank you all.